Welcome back to Two Pretty Good Bad Men, an Alias Smith & Jones podcast. I'm People Magazine's Sexiest Man of the Year, Tabitha, and today we are covering Season 2, Episode 3, Jailbreak at Junction City. This episode was shot at the end of June 1971, and it aired on September 30th, 1971. Fun fact, September 30th, 1971 was my mom's 5th birthday. It was the first episode shot for Season 2, but for whatever reason it aired third. And this one is a full Huggins production. He did the story and the teleplay. Our director is Jeffrey Hayden, who did, a third of the episodes for Season 1, and he will go on to do more. I'm glad that was short because we've got a gaggle of guest stars this week, and all of them are men. There's not a single woman in this episode. I'm just saying. First and most importantly, we have Oscar, Emmy, and Tony Award winner Jack Albertson as Judge Hanley. I'm sure you all know him as Grandpa Joe from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and or as the Man from Chico and the Man. That's what he won his Emmy for. He won his Oscar and his Tony for the same role in The Subject Was Roses. Albertson started out in vaudeville. When that died, he moved on to Broadway, and from there, film and television. He voiced the hunter in Disney's The Fox and the Hound, which is the most depressing Disney animated movie of all time. Worse than Bambi. I can't even talk about it or I'm going to start crying. We're done talking about it. We're done. Let's move on. He was also in The Poseidon Adventure, and I really love those old disaster movies. As for television, it might go quicker to list the shows he wasn't in. He had a recurring role on the show Police Surgeon. He starred on a short-lived show called Ensign O'Toole, and he also had a recurring role on the TV version of The Thin Man. He guest starred on everything from The Jackie Gleason Show to Charlie's Angels. He did 6 episodes of Mr. Ed, 3 episodes of Have Gun Will Travel, 2 of The Twilight Zone, 3 of Run for Your Life, 9 of The Red Skelton Hour, 3 of Gunsmoke, and another short-lived show in 1978 called Grandpa Goes to Washington. I think they went wrong right at the title on that one. He passed away in 1981. Next up is George Montgomery as Sheriff Kurt Clitterhouse. Born in Montana, he started out as a boxer. Eventually he moved to California to train under ex-heavyweight champion James J. Jeffries. It was then he was noticed by the studios and became a stuntman for a few years. After that, he was sort of a B-movie Western actor. He almost got a big break playing Philip Marlowe in 1947's The Brasher Doubloon. Unfortunately, he was following Bogart, and that didn't work out too well for him. Because Bogart is Bogart, and George Montgomery is not. He actually didn't do a whole lot of television. He did star in the short-lived Western show Cimarron City, and he guest starred on Wagon Train, Bonanza, I Spy, The $6 Million Man, and The Odd Couple. He was married to singer Dinah Shore for quite a while, and the couple had 2 children together. After their divorce, his former housekeeper grew obsessed with him and wanted to pull a murder-suicide with him. Luckily, she failed. She was only convicted of misdemeanor assault. Reports say she broke into his house and waited there for days for him to return home so she could ambush him. He was able to disarm her with no one getting hurt. Moving on, we have James Wainwright as Ribbs Johnson. Wainwright starred in 2 one-season wonders. The first was called Jigsaw, nothing to do with John Kramer or elaborate torture devices. This one was about a cop who worked missing persons cases. And the second one was Beyond Westworld. That one was about Westworld. You know, robots, theme parks. You get the idea. He guest starred in all the westerns: Bonanza, Gunsmoke, The Guns of Will Sonnet, Death Valley Days, and The Virginian. He had a recurring role on the show Daniel Boone. He worked on The Bold Ones, The Lawyer. That show is back. Policewoman, McCloud, The Incredible Hulk, and that episode of MASH where Hawkeye takes out a healthy colonel's appendix to keep him from sending soldiers into a suicide mission. Remember, BJ got all bent out of shape about it? Even though Hawkeye and Trapper did the exact same thing to some other colonel back in season 2 or 3 and it was fine. But BJ had to make it a whole moral dilemma. Now, I'm not picking on BJ, I just think it's interesting how differently the same plot was treated by 2 different characters. And I'm off in the weeds, sorry about that. Finally, we have Angus Duncan as Chester Brubaker. He guest starred on 3 episodes of Starsky and Hutch. The Setup Part 1, which, whatever, and Targets Without a Badge Parts 2 and 3. He worked on Switch, Beretta, Barnaby Jones, and It Takes a Thief. I knew we'd get it in here somehow. He also played Mary's ex-boyfriend on The Mary Tyler Moore Show. from the very first episode, like the whole reason she went to Minneapolis in the first place. That's a cool legacy. With all that aside, let's get to the episode. There is no sneak peek this time. Instead, we just see a bank blow up in a place called Junction City, and a bunch of ADR voices saying stuff like, "Hey, the bank's been robbed. See which way they went? Get on your horses, let's go!" After the opening credits, our boys are riding into a different town. Jack Albertson gets the special guest star credit this week, and that's fair. They go into the telegrapher's office, hoping that there's one waiting for them. There isn't. Hayes decides to send one off instead. It's for Big Mac McCready, who supposedly has a job for them. Hayes doesn't have the 60 cents to send the telegram, though. In fact, the boys are flat broke. And I really feel like they shouldn't be. They've been paid pretty decently, and they're trying to stay low, so where is all their money going? Is Hayes losing it all in poker? Unable to do anything more at the telegraph office, they leave. Kid announces that he's going to the saloon to get a beer, and he's not going to worry about how he's going to pay for it. Hayes dutifully follows him. As luck would have it, there's a bowl of hard-boiled eggs on the counter that are free with each beer. Hayes smiles when he sees them. He takes off one of his gloves and pours some salt into his bare palm. The kid orders the beers, but the bartender is instantly suspicious that they don't have any money. Hayes bets the bartender $10 that he can make an egg stand on its end. Bartender decides to be a little shit and smashes it so that it stands up. Hayes clarifies that he can do it without breaking the shell. The bartender tries it himself a couple of times, and then, confident that it can't be done, accepts the bet. Hayes says he's going to blow on it for luck and then discreetly licks the bottom of it. He then places it in his palm for a moment, and then on the bar, and sure enough, the egg stays standing. The bartender inspects the egg and tries it again. Doesn't work for him. He coughs up the money and the beers. And I think this is really cool. So the salt in his palm sticks to the egg after he licks it, and the salt acts as like little stands for the egg so it stays upright. I have been told that this can work. I haven't tried it yet, but I intend to. It's such a small part of the episode that really could have been cut, but I love that it's there. It shows how many tricks Hayes knows and how quickly he thinks. The sheriff caught the act and was greatly amused by it. He introduces himself to the pair, and they politely tell him that they're only passing through, waiting to hear about a job. For now, he leaves them be. Now that they have the $10, they're able to send the telegram. Kid doesn't want to keep hanging around, though, because he doesn't like the way the sheriff was looking at him. Hayes insists they go back to the saloon because he saw some poker games he can easily win. Both boys get involved in a game, and the kid actually beats an irate player. Good for him! He did it! A+, kid. Oh, and the pissed off player calls Kid Babyface, and that makes me laugh, because Ben Murphy does look young, but baby-faced? I don't know if I'd go that far. Naturally, this guy accuses our heroes of cheating, but the other players voice that they don't think there's any cheating going on, and we know that there's not. The guy says either Kid or Hayes has to go to another table or he doesn't play. Kid says, "Fine, then don't play." They go back and forth for a bit, and Hayes just kind of watches like he's half nervous and half annoyed. Then he spots the sheriff enter and doesn't say anything, but the look on his face says he really doesn't want this to come to guns. Too late. Kid is in the zone and easily outdraws the guy. Hayes squeezes his eyes shut and kind of winces. Does he really think that that guy could beat the kid? And if he really did think that, maybe he should have stepped in. So now that Kid has destroyed yet another guy's manhood, the sheriff would like to speak with them privately. The script notes for that little standoff are great. They read that the kid, quote, face his antagonist with an expression of put-upon weariness. Although he's confident, Curry never faces a situation like this with boredom or smiling contempt, because he knows he could come up against someone someday who is better than he is. End quote. That's good character continuity, because the kid said the same thing himself way back in Exit to Wickenburg. There's also a note on how they edit these moments too. They hold on the antagonist for 12 frames, which is half a second, while he goes for his gun. Then they cut back to the kid, who of course already has his gun in hand. It's simple but effective, if kind of funny, because once again, all I can think of is Gene Wilder in Blazing Saddles, where it's very much played for laughs. Moving on, the sheriff tells them about the bank robbery in Junction City, where the robbers made off with $62,000. He says his deputies are out on their trail, but that leaves him with no deputies in town, and asks them if they would sign on. Flattered, Hayes said they'd love to, but they're waiting for that job from Big Mac. Eventually they do get a response from Mac saying that the job fell through. And I love that they actually got Burl Ives to do the voiceover of the telegram. I love that he was willing to do that. Like, nobody even needed to read it out loud at all. It's printed in the nicest handwriting I've ever seen. But he made the time to go in and record that. Bless him. The boys get on their horses, but not before watching the telegraph guy run over to the jail and then right back. They really should have hightailed it then and there. The sheriff runs out and says, hey, he just so happened to hear about their job falling through and he still wants them for the deputy jobs. He offers them $100 apiece. He's got 2 of the robbers locked up and he wants the boys to deliver them to Junction City. Hayes asks who the sheriff is there and he says it's a guy named Sweeney, and since they don't recognize the name, they agree. While they're riding with the 2 prisoners, the other 2 bank robbers follow them. That night, Hayes is keeping watch by the fire while the other 2 robbers sleep. The 2 that are free sneak up on him, but our boys were 1 step ahead of him. The kid was waiting in the trees. Now they've got all 4 of the guys who robbed the Junction City Bank. The next day, the leader of the bandits, Ribs Johnson, tries to bribe them with the $62,000 that they have stashed away from the robbery, but they're not even remotely tempted. Unfortunately, it does come out that the sheriff was murdered during the robbery. Sheriff Sweeney is no more, and he was replaced by a man named Kurt Clitterhouse. And the boys do know him. So now they're stuck. They can't let them go, but if they turn them in, they risk Clitterhouse turning them in. They talk it out, trying to figure out their best option. Kid suggests that they try and make a deal with Clitterhouse, and he volunteers Hayes for the job because he's the talker. Hayes doesn't have a better idea, so he agrees and he goes to see Clitterhouse alone. The 2 talk, and he offers all 4 prisoners and a reward for the 2 that Hayes and Kid caught, as long as Clitterhouse lets them go. Clitterhouse agrees to this very easily. Hayes doesn't know if he can trust him, but Clitterhouse, I love saying that word by the way, Clitterhouse, it sounds ridiculous. Clitterhouse gives him his word, and he doesn't go back on his word. I'll give the boys some credit that they really don't have much of a choice but to trust this guy. Although, here's a thought. How about you send Clitterhouse a note telling him where he can pick up the bank robbers that they'll leave tied up somewhere while they get out of town? You ever think of that, Hayes? Or am I smarter than you? Anyway, they bring all 4 of them into town, and those ADR voices are back, and they're more annoying this time. That's them! That's the bank robbers! I seen them! Did you see the money? Did they bring the money back? Do they have the money? Folks, please go back to your miserable, meaningless lives, okay? You're not involved in the story. Inside, they meet Clitterhouse, Deputy Johnny, and Judge Hanley. Hanley is extremely grateful to the boys, especially since they caught the other 2. And Clitterhouse immediately turns on them. What an asshole. Well, here's the thing, actually. Once again, they are guilty of the crimes they're wanted for. Clitterhouse is a sheriff, and sure, he lied to them and double-crossed them, but Hayes and Kid have gone to great lengths to lie and double-cross people in the name of staying on the straight and narrow, so I can't really hate him. Yet. Hold that thought. Hanley is confused, and Clitterhouse tells him what happened. Hanley seems disgusted that Clitterhouse would give his word and then break it, and he still doesn't get why Hannibal Hayes and Kid Curry would turn in bank robbers. Still, he leaves the sheriff's office, and Clitterhouse locks the boys in a cell next to the robbers. Kid says this is all Hayes' fault for agreeing with his plan. Later, Hayes talks to Ribs through the bars. He spoon-feeds him a plan that Ribs is happy to go along with, since it's not like he has any ideas. Hayes tells Ribs that he can deal with Clitterhouse just like they did for that $62K that's still hidden. He instructs Ribs to tell Clitterhouse where the money is, so he can go get it, and once he's got it, he will have to let Ribs and the others go, because if he doesn't, they'll start screaming their heads off that Clitterhouse has the money. Ribs says it can't be that easy. Oh, but it is, my friend. Ribs relays all this perfectly to Clitterhouse, and Clitterhouse goes for it. Okay, see, now I can hate him. He's not an honest lawman, he's just another greedy asshole, willing to break whatever laws he wants as long as it pays off for him. Ribs tells him to tie up a gun in a balloon and put it in their soup. If it's in the soup, he can claim the cook planted the gun. Oh, so you're just gonna frame this poor guy, who probably gets paid next to nothing? Asshole. Clitterhouse goes and digs up the money, and Kid and Hayes sing. And I can't lie, they're not great. I mean, I've heard worse, but, please stop singing, boys. Pretty please? Mercifully, a lawyer named Brubaker comes to see them. They ask him to fight their extradition to Wyoming, but they can't exactly pay the man, they have no money, and they have no assets. So Brubaker's like, well, I don't know what you want me to do. I'm out. That night, Clitterhouse does keep his part of the bargain, because he has no choice, and ties up a little tiny gun in a yellow balloon. And when the cook that he's planning to frame brings the soup, he drops it in one of the bowls. Also, it looks like Hayes has a newspaper in the jail cell. Who gave him a newspaper? Poor Deputy Johnny innocently hands them their food. Later, Clitterhouse leaves the station in Johnny's capable hands. Once he's gone, Ribs makes his move and pulls the gun on him. He reluctantly unlocks the cells and everyone is allowed out. They lock Johnny to the bars and gag him. They all grab rifles and leave the station. Hayes and the kids split off from Ribs and his gang. Ribs doesn't really care, since as far as he knows, they're just trying to get away on their own. But Hayes and Kid run right back to the station, and Kid apologizes to Johnny about the situation. He takes the gag off, but he can't unlock him because he don't have the keys, but it's still nice of him to apologize. Johnny asks why they came back, and Kid says he's not even sure and asks Hayes to explain. I love that he doesn't know the full plan that Hayes is implementing, but he trusts them to get him out of this situation. The two of them sit back down in their cells. While Ribs and company try to escape, they get trapped in the livery stable by half the men in that town and led back to jail. Judge Hanley orders everyone locked up, and that includes Sheriff Clitterhouse. Ribs realizes he's been fooled by Hayes. He asks why they didn't try to run too. Well, they couldn't leave without Clitterhouse behind bars. And now the random scene with the lawyer begins to make sense. They told him everything that was about to happen and asked him to tell the judge. The judge sits down with the boys and tries to figure out their motive. They can't deny that they are Hayes and Curry at this point. They explain that they're trying to clean up their record, but he says that going straight isn't going to get them out of their 20-year prison sentence. They claim that Ribs would have killed him if they'd have gone with him, but the judge doesn't buy that either. He guesses correctly that they've been offered an amnesty deal because he knows the governor offered and granted it to someone else in the past. They say they can't confirm that. Brubaker comes back in, and he's got the money that was under the floor in Clitterhouse's cabin. Ha ha! Suck it, Clitterhouse! Judge Hanley orders them to bring our boys to the courtroom. He lets them both out on bail on the $18 or $19 that they have, and then he says that sometimes when people are out on bail, they just never see them again. He basically lets them go. I love this character. He's a fair and good person. He didn't like the underhanded way Clitterhouse turned in the boys at the start, and he seems to believe that the guys deserve their shot at amnesty. As they're about to leave town, Kid asks how Hayes knew the judge would be on their side. He really did bet their lives on it, but what choice did he have? Sometimes our boys read people very, very wrong, but in this case, Hayes called it right. The end. This is a really good episode. I love that half of it takes place in the jail, and that Hayes pretty much comes up with a plan to get out right away. Ribs is delightfully dumb, and I might like him more if he hadn't actually killed a man. Off-screen, but still. Clitterhouse is much more of a villain since he betrays them, but then it turns out that he's just as bad as Ribs. I'm glad he got his in the end. I love Judge Hanley for having sympathy for them, but still stays within the law. Honestly, the egg trick at the beginning is my favorite part. I really love that Hayes just knew how to do that. I don't really have a line of the week, just Clitterhouse. Every time they say Clitterhouse. And the episode goes to Hayes. You can argue that he messes up by trusting Clitterhouse, but A, that was the kid's idea, and B, he fixes it. Next time on Alias Smith and Jones, Kid gets a mustache, and also Roger Davis is here, and that's a little weird. Research for this podcast comes mainly from the wonderful book Alias Smith and Jones, The Story of Two Pretty Good Bad Men, by Sandra K. Sagala and Joanne M. Bagwell. Thanks for listening. Clitterhouse.